Well, buckle up because this is going to be an in-depth interview with someone who's been involved with comedy and improv and movies and television, the stage. This guy has rubbed elbows and worked with Tina Fey, with Amy Poehler, Ashton Kutcher, Johnny Knoxville, Stephen Colbert, Robert Smigel, Dana Carvey. The list goes on. He's been in movies like The Ringer, Galaxy Quest, Dude, Where's My Car? And a significant reoccurring role in the TV show Wizards of Waverly Place. I am talking about Bill Chott. This is a great interview about the career path that he took, about his view on making plans for your career. Yeah, right? And there's some great advice at the end about improv acting, if you just want to know the inside workings of how to do that well. There's so much great stuff packed into this interview. I want to get right to it. I'm just going to mention one URL, one website address, and 3 quick things that you need to look into at said website address. And that is empartist.com. It's short for empowered artist, empartist.com. Go there and check out 3 things. One is a link to the Empowered Artist book page. There's also an Empowered Artist mastermind group. And then there's also a link to something called the Creative Entrepreneur Summit, a live event happening in St. Louis, Missouri on November 14th. And St. Louis just happens to be the city where I live and where my guest, Bill Chott, also spent many of his formative years. So let's get right to that interview. I'm so glad you're listening. This is going to be a great one. You are listening to the Creative Entrepreneur, Season 2, Episode 13. Well, look who it is on Skype with me right now. It is Bill Chott from his home somewhere in the L.A., Pasadena region. Hi, Bill.
Hello, Bob. How are you? I'm
doing fantastic, and this is really a thrill for me to get on Skype here and have a conversation with you. Although it's not our first meeting,
not at all
by any stretch, because we both have roots in the St. Louis, Missouri area. I still live here, and you escaped years ago. But it's actually just earlier this year that we actually got to hang out. I attended some of your you did a couple of improv workshops here, and we actually performed one night, which was really fun.
Yeah, I love that.
And so I would like to take this opportunity to share with my audience your history and your philosophy. And so I guess a good place to start was just, your story. So you were born and raised here in St. Louis, right? Was that?
Well, I was born and semi-raised in St. Louis.
Semi-raised.
We moved around a lot because my dad was a writer. He used to write corporate theater, slideshows, speeches for the presidents of companies.
Oh, wow.
And so when I was born, I believe he was still working for McDonnell Douglas. He wrote, did a lot of PR and things like that for the space program. And then we moved to Texas, where my brother was born, right outside of Houston, and then back to St. Louis again. And then we moved to Michigan, and twice in Michigan, and then back to St. Louis, then Pennsylvania, back to St. Louis, and then I started high school. So I was in a different school almost every year growing up.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that can be a little bit chaotic.
But St. Louis is definitely my hometown. It's where all my family is, with a few exceptions, people who've moved on here and there.
Do you think that moving around affected your personality in any way? Did you have to impress people or be funny or be personable? Do you think that was an influence, or was that just who you were naturally, regardless?
I think it's a little bit of both. My mom used to talk about how when I was a kid, I would, I guess, for lack of a better word, start fights with older kids because I wanted to get into conversations with them, and I didn't know how. So at that point, that was my method when I was about 5 or 6 years old. As I got older, I got a lot shyer and discovered magic. And I think magic is what allowed me first to reach out to other people, and it's how I would always magic and I guess cartooning a little bit, not on any sort of professional level, but it's, what I did. Is how I kind of reached out, show people, hey, look at this thing that I do. And then I started doing more theater, and I think improv really kind of busted me out of my shell, when I went to study it in Chicago.
Yeah, because that's how when I first started hearing your name years ago was through something we'll talk about as we go through this little journey of yours called the Improv Trick, which I know was based out of St. Louis for a while. Then I know you went to Chicago. So yeah, it sounds like a series of things led to the improv. It was like doing theater, doing magic, which is a form of performance, of course. And so what was the, when did you first start, when did improv get on your radar and you dove into that?
I'm going to blame that on my dad, who, my dad, like I said, he wrote a lot of corporate theater and stuff like that. And when he was doing some projects for International Harvester and Hormel and a couple other companies that were based out of Chicago, my dad was familiar with Second City through, I guess, SCTV. Or maybe he was familiar with it even before then. But he would always tell companies, listen, if your show's in Chicago, you really ought to use the Second City. And so he kind of fed into the early program that Second City has, the Second City Communications, which I wound up working at later, doing shows for corporations in addition to the, community shows and, shows at theaters and community centers and colleges and whatnot that Second City does. So he exposed us to that. He exposed me to SCTV, Saturday Night Live, Fernwood Tonight. He would let me stay up way past my bedtime for that age to be able to watch some of these shows. And, of course, there's nothing I love more than watching my dad laugh and laughing with him. And my mom would always go to sleep early. She loves to laugh, but she doesn't like late night comedy. And, she's usually out early. So, a lot of guys bond with their dad over sports. I definitely bond with my dad over comedy.
That's pretty cool. It always amazes me how the things that people do are intertwined in their lives and, in not unusual ways, but maybe unexpected ways that people wouldn't normally think of. But so I can see why you have an affinity and affection for performing and laughing and making people laugh. That's awesome. Yeah, did you start doing improv locally in St. Louis before you?
I always knew I wanted to do improv, and I was pretty sure I wanted to do it at the Second City because of those influences. Everybody my dad introduced me to, for the most part, Fred Willard and John Belushi, Joe Flaherty, all these people that I really idolized. He was like, that's where they came from. You ought to study from there. And so when I got out of college, my friend Ray Brewer and some friends that I met later, Tom and Ray and some of these other guys had studied in Chicago and came back and said, hey, we want to start this troupe. And so I would, the summer before my senior year in college and like winter break and stuff like that, I would come back in and sit in rehearsals with them. And I brought them to my college to perform. And so they kind of said, okay, well, when you get out of school, you'll be in the troupe.
Was that in the 80s or 90s?
That would have been 91 is when I got out of school. And it was a troupe called The Network. And then the week that I graduated college was the same week that they were chosen to step in for a headliner who couldn't make it at Catch a Rising Star at Union Station. And so we were the headliners. So I stepped out of college into a headlining position at a comedy club, which most people don't do. Usually it's a long upward climb, but I got lucky because of all of the efforts that they had put into the group. And so after about a year of that, I decided it was time to move to Second City and get a formal education myself.
So finally, you get to this school that has been like the crowning achievement in your profession. I guess was that pretty exciting the first day you walked in as a student there? Or whatever?
It was, yeah. I walked in the front door, which is no longer the front door at Second City, but walked up the stairs, and then there was this big list of all the names who had ever performed in a Second City review. And nowadays they do it by review, where these people joined what review, so you can kind of get an even better historical sense of when people were there.
And a review is a cluster of performers like go on the road that work together. Is that what you mean by review?
Well, a review is a show that group of people put together, and each one has a different name, like flag smoking in lobby only, and Iraq, you break, things like that.
All right. Cool.
Truth, Justice, or The American Way, things like that. Anyway, so we saw this big list of names, and I realized I was standing next to somebody else, and I was like, I'll bet this guy's here for the class too. But we were both like a half hour early or so. And it turned out to be one of my best friends to this day, Rich Tallarico, who writes for Key and Peele and Review on Comedy Central, and he's written for The Tonight Show, Saturday Night Live, Mad TV, just about every like top tier comedy project he has both written and performed for. We were always hopping up trying to get into scenes together in class. Even though they try to like, mix it up and make sure you get a chance to work with everybody, we would always kind of like make eye contact and dash up to the stage together. And we wound up in that class. It was a class called Improv for Actors taught by Stephen Colbert, because you have to audition to get into the conservatory. And we both didn't get in on that first try. So we wound up in this class. So at first I was a little discouraged. I was like, I've been performing improv for a year doing sketch. I should be up there now. And then I realized that two of the best amazing things that ever could have happened, which was having Stephen Colbert as a teacher and to, become good friends with Rich Tallarico, happened as a result, which is why I tell people, accept failure in your life with improv, because the failure is where the great things come from.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I just, those who are regular listeners to the podcast hopefully heard my, I think it's going to be it was a two-part interview with Laura Hall, and we talked extensively about that. Yeah, you have to become comfortable with failure to embrace improv and really to embrace success in any field of endeavor in the arts, and so that's a reoccurring theme here with the people that I interview. So back then, Stephen Colbert obviously didn't have he wasn't at the stature that he is now. Was he still, I guess, within the Second City community? I don't know, what was his reputation?
Yeah,
then?
He was. Most of the people who teach at the conservatory are performing members or people who had performed or directed there in the past. And, then they teach. At that time, he was in the very first Second City show I saw, which was the Second City ETC, which is the second theater that was formed for, a little bit more slightly experimental shows. And it's, it was kind of like the way you'd progress at Second City was you'd be selected to be in a touring company after you complete the conservatory. And you don't always have to complete the conservatory to get into Second City. A lot of people just come in from, other backgrounds, whether it be comedy sports or Improv Olympic or IO or The Annoyance. So you go from there to the ETC to the main stage. And that's not always like the prescribed order, but, most people would tour, then go to ETC and then get moved up to main stage. But like Tina Fey went straight from touring, we were in the same touring company, to the main stage because she was undeniably a brilliant actor and writer. And at that time also, I think that was at the time that the Second City decided that it was important to make the cast equal in terms of 3 men and 3 women. Because a lot of times it would be, it would always be like a 6-person cast, maybe 7 at most, usually predominantly men and maybe 1 woman or 2 women later on in the 80s when they decided they were going to be, a little more feminist.
Right.
So, yeah.
And there are a lot of funny ladies in comedy, that's for darn sure.
Incredibly. But I'm glad that steps like that were taken to start creating more diversity for women and also, obviously people of color in improv.
Yeah, and I did, there's one piece, I think you and I have actually had a little brief conversations about it, about when you toured, you mentioned it, Tina Fey, Amy Poehler was also in your troupe, and I think some other folks whose names escape me now. But
Rachel Dratch.
Oh, yeah. That's right. She was on Saturday Night Live and been in movies. And we're going to get to I know you've got an illustrious career in movies and television as well. But what was the time frame between that, walking in that first day to being in the touring group with Tina and Amy and Rachel and the rest?
Okay. I started in October of 92. I guess it was 2 years because it was a year in the training center, and then I stepped out for a little bit and then came back in because I was also working at Comedy Sports, and I took 1 or 2 classes at IO with Sharna. And by that I only mean like 1 class 1 week and then another class, and then I couldn't afford it.
Right.
So that was part of the problem in Second City because I couldn't afford that, and then I realized that they had internships. So I started working the box office at Second City for the student shows, which was part of the program. And then from there, I guess about 2 years after that, I completed the conservatory, hired up and toured for about a year. And then I started understudying the main stage because they take people to understudy the main stage from the touring companies. So as soon as you're in a touring company, you're also a de facto understudy for the main stage.
Oh wow, I didn't know that the hierarchy went that way. Yeah, I could easily see it going where you're performing in Chicago and then you get upgraded to tour, but it seems like it's a different route there. Yeah, it's more prestigious to be on a main stage in the Chicago Second City. Okay, cool.
Definitely. That's where the prestige is, which means you're making equity minimum.
Okay.
The touring company, you're in a sweaty van driving across places that you could be flying to for about $75 a show.
Oh, I see. And so you did this with Tina and like I said, Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, who are, and they, similar to how I asked about Stephen Colbert earlier, they were not marquee names at that time, but I guess you said Tina stood out. But did you have any sense that we're going somewhere, or were you just all, just actors having fun and just doing the best you can?
I think it was a little bit of both. We were all definitely just actors having fun. We all knew that, as a result of working with Second City, that some cool things were open to us, because when Saturday Night Live comes a calling, one of the places they do sit down is Second City. They'll check out both theaters. If you're lucky, they'll see a touring company, but that usually doesn't happen. But we knew that was the route, at least one of the routes to get there. Of course, the Groundlings or doing stand-up is another route. We had a unique touring company. Not that we were that much different from any other touring companies, but we had, all of us, a push to create more original material. And when you tour, you usually tour with archival material, because a lot of what we do is with Second City is sketch. Second City's famous for improv, but most of the show is sketch, and then there's an improv component, and then there's a whole improv set at the end, which is kind of like an extra treat. Our company, we enjoyed doing the archival material. It's great to do stuff that was written by Alan Arkin or Martin Short or, any number of the amazing people who've worked at Second City. But we also had a drive to create our own material. And so we were one of the first companies that put together a show that was almost completely our own material. We didn't get to tour all that material that often. We'd often do it at Second City when it was our Tourco night. Every third or fourth Monday, your touring company would get a chance to put up their review, whatever we had been touring. And we'd monkey with ours a little bit and put in more original material.
So you were all creative and experimenting and writing, and just a lot of history there. And so I guess at least three of the people from your troupe did actually end up being cast members on Saturday Night Live. Did you was that in your goal, on your horizon? Did you have an opportunity?
That was what I wanted to do. I had an opportunity to audition, and I was, one of the few people that had been plucked up to audition from the touring company. Usually, like I said, they just come and see the ETC and the main stage review. And fortunately, one of my friends, Todd Stashwick, was auditioning, and they were really kind of hot and heavy for him at the time. He wound up not getting it for whatever reason, but he was the one they were, really giving a lot of attention to. And he said, well, you really should give a look at Bill Chott. And so all of a sudden they contacted me, and I wound up getting flown to New York, standing right there on the spot where the guests give their monologues. And, you're given about 5 minutes to do whatever you think is going to really sell you there. So what I did was my Rush Limbaugh impression, which got a lot of laughs. And I was warned at first, don't expect laughs, go in there and do your thing. So then I went on to a piece that I used to do in our Tourco shows, which was, and now, ladies and gentlemen, Jackie Gleason taking a difficult crap. And so then I would do this. It's basically just a vocal impression of him, taking a poo. And that's when I lost them. I didn't hear any laughter whatsoever. And I realized that was kind of where I blew it. And I wasn't quite sure why, although I knew that, you can't do poop humor really on TV, or at least at that point you couldn't. And years later, what happened was I was auditioning for the Dana Carvey show, and, with several other friends of mine, same sort of position. We were flown out to New York to read for Dana Carvey and Louis C.K. and Robert Smigel. And Robert Smigel, whom I had seen on SCTV and really loved and appreciated, I had no idea he knew who I was. He stops in the lobby and he says, "Hey, Bill." And I was like, "Hi." And I'm elated, but I'm also feeling weird because my fellow actors in the lobby see me interacting with him, and I always feel uncomfortable when there's a sudden like status shift between people in the room.
Right.
So I was like, hey, and he was like, could you do me a favor? Will you do your Jackie Gleason taking a difficult crap for Dana? And I was like, I don't know about that. I did that once before, and it didn't turn out so well. And he was like, yeah, I know, but I saw your Saturday Night Live audition, and I was laughing for two reasons. One, because I thought it was really funny, and two, because I knew how much Lauren was hating it. And he said, I think Dana will appreciate it for the same reason. Will you do it? So I did it, and it was one of the reasons that got me the job.
Oh,
so another example of, failure leading to success.
I don't even think I even knew about that gig. So you were on the Dana Carvey show?
Yeah, in all of 6 weeks.
Okay.
But it was working with Louis C.K. as the head writer, Robert Smigel as the executive producer, Charlie Kaufman was one of the writers on it, Bob and David, Bob Odenkirk and David Cross, who are kind of like on a hiatus from Mr. Show, sat in and kind of helped us out a little bit. John Glazer, who does Delocated. Who else? Mike Stoyanov, Dino Stamatopoulos, who people might know as Starburns from Community. Just an amazing, and Stephen Colbert and Stephen Carell and Heather Morgan and I were kind of the hired cast members.
So this says something a lot about, I don't know, I guess like a lot of people early on in their careers, there's a couple of things they say, oh gosh, I don't know anybody, I don't have any experience, so it's like, it seems like what do you think and I know I'm going to ask you some official factors to your success, but since we're on this, it seems like there are a couple of things here. One, you went to Chicago, which is not only a major city, but it was the major hub and the institution, second city that was known for, improv and what you wanted to do. And then just simply by acting and taking risks and getting out there, you ended up rubbing elbows with all these movers and shakers in the TV and comedy world. And what do you think, why is it that so many people get hung up with that? Like, what's the difference between what you did in that world and other people that just sort of sit back and go, I don't know anybody, you got to know somebody, blah, 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 Well,
I certainly hope people don't let that hold them back from, following their dreams. And now, in this day and age, you don't even need to go to Chicago. If you're good at what you do and you put it online, somebody can see it somewhere, like, Andy Samberg, I'm not sure where he was living when Lonely Island hit and became a big online success, but that's what got him the job. So it can happen anywhere for anybody. At that time, you had to be there. That's one of the reasons why I moved to L.A. from New York, because Dana Carvey show was in New York, and then the money ran out. I earned a little bit extra money from doing a Missouri lottery spot because I was back home over the holidays or something like that, and had a chance to audition for it. And I booked it, but that money was running out too. So I was like, well, while I'm still getting these residual checks, I better move out to L.A. and move to L.A. because back then, once again, no internet. You had to send in a tape, FedEx, or your agent would FedEx it from New York to L.A. And a lot of times, by the time it hit L.A., they had already cast the job, even if it was overnight, because that's how fast the industry moves.
Wow.
But yeah, I hope people don't think that the connections will be made. If you're doing what you love to do, it'll also force you as a passion to go out and see it and interact with it. And then if you're in another city and doing it online, start online conversations about it and, get involved that way and meet people that way. It just happens as a result. And I never made it my goal. I never said, like, I'm going to go out and network today.
Right.
Like I said, I met my good friend Rich just by showing up to class. And the cast that I wound up working with Second City, that was a result of going through the training center and, just being seen. I also want to say this. Although I always wanted to be an actor and knew I wanted to be like on Saturday Night Live or doing sketch comedy or working in comedy to some degree, I never set a course for that. Like, what am I going to do besides take these classes? Because you really do need to do that. I was fortunate enough that I took the classes. I had no headshots. I think by the time I auditioned for the touring company, I had headshots, but only because a good friend of mine, Cassie Harlow, paid for them for me. She said, there's no reason that you are acting in this town and you don't have headshots. And she was a professional actor and was the first female voice for a Budweiser commercial. She does a lot of work in voiceover as well. So I I had I didn't work too hard to get headshots. I certainly didn't do a mailing with it because at that point I didn't even know you needed to do a mailing,
Right.
or even if I did, I didn't think you could afford it, and I certainly couldn't at that point because I was scrounging for change and eating like 2 donuts as a meal for the day because that's what I could get with that change. Or when here's what I would do. I was hosting at Second City, and when I was hosting, that's when you just like sit people at their chairs and keep an eye and make sure nobody's heckling or smoking in the room or whatever. And I would like hope to God that people would leave their doggy bags behind from this restaurant that was next door called That Steak Joint. Sometimes I'd get lucky and there'd be like a half gnawed at steak, and I'd be like, dinner.
So there were some lean times. That's what you're saying.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I may not be lean, but the times were.
You pay your dues. Yeah.
Yeah. So I never even did a mailing with those headshots, and somehow talent agents knew to come out to Second City and watch those Monday shows that we did. And I got approached and was signed at Suzanne's A+. And that was my first representation. And I started doing, commercials, industrials, things like that. And the reason I got my first ever gig at all was because of my friend Yvonne, who started a theater in New Orleans. If you're ever there, it's called La Nuit. She does comedy, sports, and also long-form improv. And anyhow, she was working at David O'Connor Casting in Chicago, and she said, "Oh, you should see Bill Chott for this." And David said, "Who the hell's Bill Chott?" And she said, "Well, I'm in class with him, and he would do this great." And so she hired me, and that was my first ever union job. And that was a result, once again, not of doing a bunch of mailings and not about knocking on a bunch of doors and being pushy, although I'm sure that works for some, but just as a result of meeting people from taking a class. So sometimes it's not even what you're learning in class, although you do learn a lot, but the people that you meet who have similar goals or headed in the same direction. And to be on the lookout for people you can help yourself.
Right. It's a two-way win-win situation, ideally.
Yeah.
And so while I do agree that you can accomplish a lot from wherever you don't use your geography as an excuse, using YouTube or blogging or podcasting or whatever your medium is, you can build a notoriety and create opportunities for yourself. However, there's also something to be said for that face-to-face interaction by showing up and having a shared experience with someone in the flesh. That's probably even more powerful in the long run. So, Bill, we've covered, a lot of that, those early years with improv in Second City and going from Chicago to New York to L.A. And I know I still have some questions that I know I'm eager to hear your answers to. And so just for the listeners out there, let's hit some of the high points of your careers. I know they include movies and TV shows. In fact, my daughter when she was younger, used to watch one of the TV shows you had a prominent role in. So, yeah, if you don't mind me to put you on the spot and listing your resume accomplishments. What transpired in those years from LA on to now?
Well, after the Dana Carvey show in New York, I did a couple independent films, auditioned for a lot of high profile film projects, but didn't get in. So I moved out to LA. I, for a while, was working in accounting because, like I said, those residual checks run out after a while. But it wasn't for long. It was maybe for about 2 months, thanks to my friend Jim Coughlin, who was already living out here. I did some Disney accounting, temping for a while, and then started auditioning heavily for commercials. Got a few nice national commercials for a lot of projects that right now don't come to mind. One of them was a WebEx spot with RuPaul that aired shortly after the Super Bowl. There was a website called Mammoth Golf. I was the spokesman for that. Greg Norman, of course, the golfer, was in it, and I played his caddy. And so I did that. And then some more movie and TV projects started coming up. Third Rock from the Sun, I made 2 appearances on that as a cable repair guy, and came back again. I was in the film Galaxy Quest as one of the nerds at the convention. That was my first feature film role that was like a semi-big budget film. And then I did Dude, Where's My Car?
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, wow.
Yeah. I was one of the guys in the bubble wrap jumpsuits in the cult. I had a small role in that. I got bonked over the head by Ashton Kutcher, who's a hell of a guy. And I met years later, and he saw me on the Fox lot, and he was like, "Hey, Bill, how's it going? You still doing improv?" "Yes, I am." That was just amazing that as all the people that he meets, that he would remember the guy, that he knocked over the head with a fire hydrant in Dude, Where's My Car? Did that. And then I think my biggest movie role so far has been The Ringer with Johnny Knoxville. And it was a Farrelly Brothers movie about Special Olympics. And a lot of people, I often get recognized for my work on Wizards of Waverly Place.
Right. That's the one my daughter used to watch. You were the principal in that show, right?
Yeah, I can usually gauge whether somebody's either a fan of the show or a parent of a fan of the show by how old they are.
Right, exactly.
I know what you know me from. But I'm most often recognized for that. Not so much now that I have a beard, but I may be cutting that off for a play I'm auditioning for, so we'll see.
Cool. And how many seasons did that show run?
I ran 5 seasons and won 2 Emmys for Best Children's Programming.
Oh, very nice. And then what's the story with the just real quickly, then I'll get into my list of questions, but the thing in St. Louis that you're known for, and I know you have an LA version of it, is the Improv trick. And so is that like your school? How would you describe that?
It's never been, except for in St. Louis, a brick and mortar location. It's always been, I'll rent out space at a theater or a school or, any place that's suitable to do class or an art gallery. Yeah, I started it in 2005, the fall after the Ringer came out. So we're on our 10th anniversary. I started it primarily because I saw how things were trending with improv schools, and improv schools were getting so much bigger and more of an institution. And what we were all supposed to be kind of like railing against was institutions and large corporate entities. And I wanted to kind of like recreate the environment in which a lot of us started off in improv, which is a smaller class environment, a smaller school where we all got to know one another, regardless of not whether we were in the same class or not. And also because I was doing a lot of teaching out of town for the Second City, for Spark Creative, a company that my friend Al started. And I was spending a lot of time out of town, and I wanted to be in town in LA. So rather than, because it was taking me out of audition opportunities here. So I said, okay, I'll start this company. And it happened because I decided I was going to start it. And all of a sudden, my friend Becky came up to me and said, hey, my friend's got this coffee gallery. He's willing to rent out space for it was something ridiculously low, like $10 or $15 an hour for class space. And I was like, yes, I'll do that. Started reaching out to people I knew who said they wanted to study improv but didn't want to sign on for a full program at an improv school somewhere necessarily. And it started to grow from there. I started Improv Trick in St. Louis because I had bought a house back in St. Louis and was trying to split my time between St. Louis and LA. And that also tended to interfere with my career a little bit. I think a lot of the stuff that I've done career-wise that hasn't worked out for me is me shooting myself in the foot or, following my heart rather than my success plan, but that I don't have.
So this is cool. We got definitely a great overview of your career. It's multifaceted, and like a lot of the people that I've interviewed, we've mentioned the plan a couple of times, and the plans that people have are. I mean, it sounds like the key to success is just to keep taking action, kind of focus on what's right in front of you, and that sort of then leads to the next opportunity, the next open door. Because you really can't plan like 3-4 steps down the road, even though you kind of beat yourself up about go with your heart instead of the plan. Yeah. But that's like a consistent thing with all the people that I interview. And so, you found your way, you found your opportunities, the relationships, the friendships that you made, ended up bearing fruit that you had no intention, or could not foresee ahead of time. And so let's go into my official list of questions here. I always like to ask every guest, if there were 3 keys to your success, if you could boil it down to 3 things, really, there were actions that you took or beliefs that you had, whatever it is for you. What would those 3 things be, Bill?
Let's see if I can come up with 3. The first and foremost, I think, would be is just believe in yourself. You have to trust yourself. Doesn't matter what other people think. Although there weren't many people that didn't believe in me. I was fortunate enough that the people that I worked with believed in me. The people, my family always believed in me since my very first play in, I think it was 5th or 6th grade at Baldwin Elementary, The Pale Pink Dragon. Since then, my whole family believed in me, and I was very fortunate about that. And that kind of fostered a belief in myself. So first of all, trust yourself, believe in yourself, and trust your instincts. Other than that, I wish I had more. You never know what you say that winds up inspiring somebody. So I'll say this too. A friend of mine once asked me, what can I do to become a successful writer? And I told him, always keep a pen handy. Mm-hmm. And he said, really? And I said, yeah, that way, because you'll always be able to find a cocktail napkin or an envelope or something, but you may not always be able to find a pen. So keep a pen so that you'll write down ideas. Ironically, yesterday I heard a friend of mine, I think it was Peter Murrieta, who said that he had a great idea, possibly for another TV show or whatever. He's produced and created a lot of television shows. And he said, I had an improv teacher which once told me, you don't need to write down your ideas. If it was a good enough idea, it'll come back to you. And he goes, and then I forgot it. Oh, well, that teacher was a junkie, so he probably just was too lazy to get a pen and paper. So
it's when you mentioned earlier, believing in yourself, and then you did admit that you had a support system. It was started with your family, and then even the people that you collaborated with were very supportive and I guess encouraging. What do you have any advice for people that might say, well, that's not true in my world, my family or my spouse or whatever, my parents don't encourage me to go into this creative field, and some of my friends are naysayers. Is there another way to get that kind of support or encouragement?
Well, you can start the positive tape running in your mind. I was never really a meditator, but I know that it works for a lot of people, and I do it from time to time. I find it effective. Another thing is just avoid the negative people. If there's a negative person at your job, just don't interact with them. Don't share with them your creativity, or share with them and realize that their input isn't necessary. They can't stop you from creating. And if it's your family, maybe you need to take a break from family. For a lot of people, family is the most helpful and supportive environment there could possibly be. And I understand for some people it may not be. Yes, they're your family. Yes, you love them. But you don't always have to run by them every creative decision you make. And, you don't always have to ask them to come to see your shows. You can just say, okay, well, I've done that. They never came. Or if they came, they had nothing but negative things to say. So centering yourself, focusing yourself, and creating that positive self-image for yourself, which was redundant, and ignoring those negative voices. I guess that's a good step in the right direction. I've been blessed with a middle class background, supportive family. Other than the poverty I created myself by moving to Chicago and trying to pay for improv classes, work a day job, and act all at the same time, was created by my own action. I've not had that much adversity to try to overcome in life. I think I've been very fortunate in that way.
And maybe you've had a similar amount, but you just position it or frame it in a way that's not a burden. Sounds like there were times when you were scraping by. However, instead of complaining about it and using it as an excuse not to pursue it, you went forward anyway.
Well, here's what I will say. I was very creative about how I would wind up with that food. Another thing I would do was, if they're working on a new main stage review, which they almost always are at Second City, a lot of times on Fridays they would have a big catered meal, usually pizza, pasta, or whatever was cheap to buy for a bunch of people there at the theater for the cast. And then if anything was left over, anybody who was hanging out could have some. And just by trying to put myself in survival mode, I wound up being surrounded by amazing creative people.
And that's probably the way also to get support is you're not getting, maybe spend less time with your negative friends and remove yourself from family members that are, or at least minimize your interaction with them. But if you're proactively engaging in your craft, especially if it involves other people, this might be harder for like solo writers or people doing painting or whatever. Obviously, improv and theater is a group activity. So maybe just whatever your discipline is, find a way to interact with others doing the same thing so that you can encourage each other. You're all on the same path. And those people are relatively easy to find these days.
Yeah.
Whatever city you're in. So you got trust yourself, believe in yourself, get support. Sounds like it's a simple one, but carry a pen or find a way to capture your ideas when you have them. That's what I gleaned from what you said. Anything else come to mind as a key to success?
Be a friendly person.
Hmm.
That's the person they want around. Most of when it comes to hiring decisions in acting, it's it's talent, but there's so many talented people to walk in the door. And if you come in there and blow them away and you don't even bother to thank them for the audition, or say something negative or come in with, something negative, who wants that on their set? Like we said, some people have had to avoid those sorts of people just to get where they are.
Yeah.
So why are they going to start introducing those people back in their life again? So be a friendly minded person. It doesn't cost anything.
Great advice. So let's, so the next question I have here, and and there's one I'm going to throw in here after this that's not on my planned list, but I think I might have some fun with it if you've got a few extra minutes. So let's talk about challenges, and maybe we've touched on some of them with the finding food to eat or whatever.
Yes.
That
was a challenge.
Yeah. Any other business or creative challenges that you faced, and an example of how you overcame it and what you learned from that experience?
Yeah, I'll say this much. When I was writing for the Dana Carvey show, I stopped writing. And it was because I felt so intimidated by the other writers around me. Like I said, Charlie Kaufman, who's now, an Oscar nominated, I believe Oscar winning screenwriter, Louis C.K., and everyone's familiar with how prolific and amazing he is. And Robert Smigel, who was probably one of the most prolific writers and constant writers on the show. He's still, involved in the show to a great degree, as well as a lot of things that Lorne Michaels does. And because my writing wasn't making its way onto the show, I got discouraged, and I would throw a bone in here or there, but I focused more on acting, and writing was something that had always been a big part of my life. I think back to when I was in grade school, I would write an essay or something like that, and the teacher would have me read it for the class and then stick around for the next class and read it for them too. And so, there was value in writing from a very early age for me. And of course, I also attribute that to my father and all the support from my mother. But I never realized that, when your faith in yourself goes down, your product stops. It stops that flow. And so when I saw that my stuff wasn't getting on the show, I stopped writing, and I stopped writing altogether. And it really hasn't been until the last couple of years that I started writing again and having faith in myself and realizing, hey, look, this stuff makes people laugh. So the biggest challenge was that self-doubt, that comparing myself to others instead of comparing myself to what I had written the day before.
It's the key. Is that, you don't want to, it's not about how you compare to other people. Yeah, it's right. Are you better than you were yesterday or the last thing that you wrote? That's really the only thing you have to focus on, right?
Yeah. So I think that's been my biggest challenge, and I'm still in the process of overcoming that one.
I just love it because in these interviews, what I discover is that no matter how successful someone is, they still wrestle with these demons, and I think people who observe them from the outside think, oh, they got it figured out. They're fearless. They've, overcome all of these. But no, people that do well in their fields have just figured out how to live with them.
Yeah.
Right. And persist despite them. So thank you for sharing that and being open about that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And welcome back to writing. It's the world needs your written words in addition to your performance. So let's talk about how about a book that changed your life, had an impact on you. What would that book be, and why did it have that impact?
I want to say that it'd be Improv by Keith Johnstone. It's one of my favorite books on the subject. Introduced to me by Stephen Colbert. It was the book he suggested for our Improv for Actors class. And it was because one of the major themes that it addresses is listening to listen instead of listening to respond.
Oh, really? Can you just explain that a little bit? Because I'm curious about that.
Well, a lot of people, when they listen in a conversation, they're listening to what the other person is saying so that they will have a response, rather than listening them to fully understand what is it this person's trying to say to me. Maybe I've heard what they've had to say before or something similar, but instead of assuming I know what the end of their sentence is going to be and start preparing my response, to take it in word by word and maybe even read some of the subtext that's there, because everything we say is with subtext. And so that's one of the major lessons that book taught me. And the concept of creating a character and how it involves creating a mask, whether it be an actual physical mask that is performed, like in Commedia dell'arte, or using your spine to create a mask. I had never intellectualized the process of creating a character. I just would do a character. When I was a kid and I'd be in like musicals and stuff like that, I would, in my car or walking around, start talking as that character and not realizing that there was a process behind it, that there was a walk. You know, I teach a character class called Improv or Character from the Ground Up. And it's all about how it starts with how you walk and what part of your foot you use and how you carry your weight that determines a lot of what you say before your mouth even opens.
Oh, wow. So it's the physical aspect of the character, not just a voice or an attitude or whatever.
Yeah.
That's so that actually leads into what I would like to throw at you here, and we've just kind of started on it, so it's perfect timing. Is maybe some of your top tips for either improvising, like some of your like rock solid principles that you've taught through the improv trick, or just performance in general. And you kind of opened up. I'm sure you just hit on a couple of them right there.
Yeah. Well, that's usually what I use to create a character is, how I literally step into a scene. Some tips that I try to give people that are just tips that were passed on to me. It's not anything I invented. One of which is bring a brick, not a cathedral. Bring a small, solid, dense bit of information, not sentences and sentences and whole ideas and thought out scenes in advance. And so, improv isn't a game of catch up with me. It's let me catch up with you. So that's a pretty solid piece of advice.
So it's in the scene, because I'm still, even though I teach it, I teach and perform improv in St. Louis and do musical improv and all that stuff. I'm still a student, and we'll be up for a lifelong student.
We all are.
Of this, yeah.
As soon as you think you got it all learned about improv, that's when it starts becoming incredibly inorganic, and it becomes writing on your feet rather than discovering on your feet.
Right. So to talk about your brick versus a cathedral, it's about adding some small detail. And so you're in a scene, you're active listening, intensely listening, not thinking ahead, and then you respond, and it helps to respond with specifics too instead of generalities. Yeah. Is that another kind of rock bottom thing?
Absolutely, yeah. Don't just pick up your laptop, pick up your MacBook Air. Don't just pick up a cup of coffee, pick up, a cup of Folgers with Peevely cream in it. Because there's assumptions people can start making. If you're a character, at least in St. Louis, and say I'm going to Schnucks or I'm going to Deerbergs, we can start making assumptions about that person. Either if they're going to Deerbergs, it's a more upscale grocery store with gourmet items.
If you say Whole Foods, that's a whole nother thing.
Exactly. That says I'm like that, only I'm a hippy dippy. I got where I am because I'm a biological engineer who really knows how to mellow rather than a soccer mom. So yeah, all of our choices reveal more about ourselves as a character. And a great quote from Del Close is, the more you act on an idea, the more it reveals itself.
And I remember one time we were sitting after a workshop you had given, and I asked you, I said, if I'm in the middle of the scene, it's just, I can tell it's just like bombing or not going anywhere. I said, what can I do to save the scene? And your response was, don't try to save the scene. You said, save the moment, I think is what you said.
Yeah.
So what is that? If you could explain that a little bit. It's more about not micromanaging, but focusing on the present moment and the details as opposed to the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, if the scene fails, it doesn't really matter because what we do is disposable art, And if somebody's videotaping it for a festival or whatever, that's probably why it's failing, I think, is because there's too much emphasis on this has to be right because it's on video or whatever. Right. But usually improv is disposable. Nobody's going to see it again. So if it fails, that doesn't matter. What matters is that you're true to your character, that if we've established something about your character, that if the information is contradictory to what's been built up, that's a revelation and it should affect the other person instead of just like letting that fact pass. It's like, a vegan who just had a steak you had a steak for lunch? Well, then maybe, your reaction to that fact can help save that moment. And then we find out, I found out I'm dying and I've wanted a steak all along. Well, you're going to kill yourself with steak, whatever. Then, you keep on stacking in that moment all the facts and opinions and all the details that you've built up in that scene to that moment and what is congruous and what is incongruous with your character. And, you you'll be able to at least find out where you are. There's a great saying that Jeff Michalski, who's a great teacher, an improviser, and was a student of Del Close, and he was actually quoted by Stephen Colbert when people were asking Stephen Colbert about, keys to his success. Learn to love the bomb, as they say it, let it fail, let it bomb. Because the sooner you're cool with that, the sooner you'll realize that it isn't really bombing if it's connecting with somebody. And if you're in that moment, who cares if the scene didn't have a logical conclusion to it, or if, the character's subtext wasn't met, they didn't get exactly what they wanted. Who cares? It was, if it's in that moment and it's present and people are witnessing it, who knows if something that they heard that night that they didn't laugh at came and affected their life in a major way the next day or the next week.
Yeah, and so it goes back to being willing to fail and not being afraid. And also, especially in front of an audience, audiences are very sympathetic to you making stuff up, and sometimes a good improviser can also kind of milk when something's kind of bombing, I suppose, even though you don't want to break the fourth wall, and but I guess there are opportunities to do that. But getting back to or related to what you said earlier, so a lot of people know, and if you don't, we'll let you know right now, the rock bottom foundational principle in improv is this concept of yes and. So you automatically accept everything that's offered to you, and then you add something to it, and as you just said, you add a brick, not a whole story or a cathedral. But I think a lot of times, like, novice improvisers think that they always have to be adding something new, and I think what you were alluding to is there's the mistake of some new thing is introduced, and instead of like paying attention to that and going down that path, you add something else, and you sort of ignore all the new stuff that's being added. And it seems to me the best scenes, and correct me if I'm wrong, is when some little element is brought up, and then both the actors recognize it, and you like milk that angle for a while. Within the scene, or maybe the entire scene is milking that, like you said, the thing about the steak and the vegan or whatever, instead of just coming up with another unusual thing to confuse muddy up the scene. Is that an accurate way to describe good improv?
Yeah. I always say, love your scene work the way you love the planet. Recycle. Keep that information coming back. Because one of the other goals, people always wonder, well, how do you know when an improv scene is over? And well, it's usually over when it's come full circle. And the only way you get full circle is recycling information and seeing where it leads you. Maybe it takes 5 minutes to complete that cycle, or maybe if you're doing long form improv, it takes 3 different scenes to complete that cycle. But if you're intent on at least taking note of all the information that comes your way and remarking on it, or not remarking when it doesn't need to be remarked upon,
right?
Because we don't need to call out everything, but calling out things that seem to be new bits of information in light of what we already know. That's all we need. Yeah, too many newer students think they have to constantly be generating new information in the scene, and sometimes it's how our characters now reacting to old information based on other new information.
Yeah, I think I know it. Yeah. And you have that point of view, or if you figure out what that is early on in the scene, then everything that happens can be responded to from that place. I guess that was an awkward way of saying it, but cool. I'm glad we got to dive into a little of that craft. At least I know I'm fascinated with it. So hopefully there's some people that are interested in improv that got a lot out of that too. So here's kind of like a bottom line. Now that we've talked about all your activities and about all these cool things that you've done, people that you've met. Bottom line, like, what truly motivates you, Bill, to do what you do? Another way of asking or saying this is, what's your big why? Like, why do you do all this performing and improv and movies and TV? What's the bottom line motivation?
There might be several, but the first thing that comes to mind is just survival. Right. I've tried banking. I was making at least a living at banking. I worked as a teller when I was working my way through improv classes. Unwisely quit doing it as I was hired to the touring company because I didn't know it was $75 a show and about 3 gigs a month. So, but that wasn't enough for me. I had to. It's what I had to do. It's why I'm writing now. It's because I felt I had to write. I feel those are my strengths. I'm also a good cook. I express myself creatively that way too. I do that also out of survival. I want to eat healthy. So if I'm going to do that, I better learn how to cook so I can at least get the right taste out of the foods I'm supposed to be eating. And I think that's the same thing with acting. It's one of the ingredients to my life. It's how I put a roof over my head. Well, that and teaching, Teaching is motivated by the same thing. It's, what is something that I enjoy doing that people are willing to pay me for so I can keep on cooking what I like to cook and eating what I like to eat and,
Right.
Experiencing what I want to experience, what allows me to travel, what allows me to meet new people.
And what about the impact that humor in particular has on other people and audiences and then also I found that teaching improv, even if somebody never performs it, I think their lives are enhanced by learning these skills. And so
I agree.
There's a service aspect to it, I feel, too.
There is, oddly enough, I think it's one that I don't think about as often until someone comes up to me and says, "Wow, thank you for that show." Or, I was really down and I saw this movie or TV show that you did, and you got me through a difficult time. Because I put it out there and I'm just thinking, what's the weirdest thing that Mr. Larry Tate can say in this moment? Or, what am I motivated to do clumsily that will get a laugh?
Right.
From almost a selfish point of view, I want to hear that laugh.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of built into all of us, I think, who are artists and performers. And I never really think about it until someone points it out that it benefits someone else. Like after 9/11, I was devastated. And I usually don't get affected by, national tragedies or tragedies that happen to people outside my immediate family. Because I'm like, oh, well, yeah, I'm really sorry that happened. But it doesn't get me depressed. And 9/11 just put me into this feeling. And then I started doubting the choices that I made for a living. Because I had friends who were, police officers, firemen, nurses. And I was like, maybe I made a mistake in my life. I should have been doing something like that. Here I am eating Cheetos, waiting for the next improv show. And then, auditions went on a hold for quite a while after 9/11. Just, a lot of projects just kind of froze up for a bit. And I was like, what I'm doing isn't so important, or so I thought. And then one thing that helped was seeing that episode of Saturday Night Live when they came back after 9/11, and that, people need to laugh. As much as comics need to hear the laughter, people need to laugh. And I don't often think in terms of what I'm doing is making a lot of people happy, because it makes me so happy.
Right, yeah, and I guess that's a common thing. And luckily, years ago, I realized that a bigger and bigger motivation as I progressed through my career is how, whether it's through my books or through my art or through my own improv music. I'm a musician too. That how it benefits others is more of a motivating factor. To me, that's when that shift happens, and I'd recommend that you maybe, think about that more often. It makes it more meaningful than simply satisfying your own needs. But it's kind of cool. You can satisfy your own needs and at the same time serve other people and deliver a ton of value. Because, I think humor, is just so beneficial for so many ways. And not everyone can deliver that in big doses like you can, sir. So, in case you forgot, you are delivering a ton of value and serving the planet in a magnificent way.
Thank you.
So sure. So Bill, where can people find out about you and stuff you have going on and any of your future projects? You have a main website where they can find you?
Well, they can go to theimprovtrick.com that tells people my most current performance dates and improv classes and some information like that. If they really want to dig, they can go to billchott.wordpress.com. And of course, Bill Chott is CHOTT, billchott.wordpress.com. And that's a website that I update semi-frequently, or they can follow me at Bill Chott on Twitter.
Very cool. Well, awesome. Well, thank you for taking a lot of time here to tell us your story and your philosophy. And even though we're friends and I knew a bit about you, I knew that I would learn a lot more. So there's a lot more to Bill Chott than meets the eye. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Bob.
All right. Thanks for listening, folks. And I'll be back with another episode of The Creative Entrepreneur, I guess, next week. So long for now.